Summer of last year, in 2017, was so weird. Let me explain. Part 1. So, I wrote a document on July 17th, 2018, titled Cause of Death, Too Much Imagination. So, with that being said, let's move forward in the doc. This doc has a content warning for murder and unreality, I guess. So, the doc as follows. I had started to investigate astrology mythos and astronomy more in April and May or so that year, which led to a stronger resurfacing of my interest in ancient Greek stuff. Ancient Roman too, I suppose. Call it overrated if you want, but the Greek and Roman pantheons are neat. Bye. So, now that we've established that basic fact, I wanted to learn more about the religions surrounding old god worship. So I went on the Amino app, which is an app you can find in the Google Play Store, and found a Pagans and Witches Amino that had information on old Hellenism. There was also, in general, other old religion stuff and various polytheism afoot, which is logical since it, was witches and pagans. Of course, you're going to come across that stuff. So, another reason I was there was because Lucian Wheeler, as an OC of mine, is some sort of, quote-unquote, Christo-pagan, I don't know, which doesn't actually make that much sense unless you understand their upbringing as partially Christian. In general, I wanted to gather information on that quote-unquote crystal healing bullshit to survey what sort of spiritual reasonings were being had about them so I could properly incorporate it into quote-unquote sensitive New Age pilot snap bullshit. For those who don't know, it's a somewhat derogatory remark in the U.S. Air Force, but I took an extra step and took, quote, New Age, quote, literally, and thus made this folk crystal woodsy fairy anti-war Enya apologist fighter pilot. Nothing about it actually makes sense unless the situation is specifically contrived to make sense. Edit. I lied. If there can be Amish fighter pilots, there can definitely be the above. Bye. So, I took it upon myself to do a variety of research during this time that had to do with witchcraft and esoteric practices. I also took an experimental approach to some of it too, and decided to ignore the science of it all for the sake of questioning the methods myself. It's one thing to research magic, and it's another to practice it spiritually, or whatever. I enjoyed my time reading about various spells for positivity and protection from negative energy. It was pretty harmless fun next to researching two-spirit duties, so I didn't feel like I was just calling myself one. A two-spirit should be able to name and identify, 300 to 500 plants and how they're used in medicine, just to name one thing I came across. So, moving on, I went to this sustainable agricultural thing in Denver, Colorado called, quote, Slow Food Nation, and it was a very cool experience. One of the stranger things that happened was that after I had left out some tea as some offering to some Egyptian and English spirits, is that I was guided by a series of subliminal messages that led to me having some interesting interactions with several Native American folks that I encountered. When that was done, I followed the direction of 3 fighter jets that had flown over the area outside that I was in at some point and purchased some kebabs from some Syrian refugees who were a part of an employment program within the Slow Food Conference. I then spoke briefly during a showing from one of the bigwig guys of the ethical egg production industry, or I don't know exactly how to word it, but that's basically the gist of it. So I was able to gift this guy a malachite egg I had brought with me on the plane to Denver, as malachite is one of the only stones with specific ties to air travel and pilots. but I felt like he should have it since he was the egg guy and I had an egg. He seemed touched. Before all that, I talked briefly with someone, as a two-spirit, and alluded that I could see a bad future if we, humans, didn't get our environmentalism and sustainable farming in check. Then he said something along the lines of, "Don't worry, I too am a seer, and we are all connected." I thought about what he meant about that for a long whiles afterward, until later that night when I was overlooking the cityscape of Denver from like a 30-foot floor, or was it 25 feet? I don't know. I think we were on the 22nd floor. I don't know. All I know is that the view was great. It was at that point that I was overcome with a sort of, shift into another state of consciousness, but quickly regained myself. So a bit startled by the sensation, I went to lay down on the bed, where I then had a vision of dancing with a giant Kali in a pink flower field. And I mean like Kali is the Hindu goddess. Yeah. So she seemed happy with me. And I came to after that and shook myself off and went to go look out the window again. I was surprisingly pleased that Kali had decided to visit me, and it felt as if I was under her protection for whatever reason. That's pretty chill, right? Just have protection from a Hindu goddess? Okay, cool. So I waved at the invisible demons, who potentially might have been clamoring at the window, and blew them all kisses. It was a very flirty moment. Sorry, three-dimensional beings, I only openly flirt with invisible demons from the veil. Don't talk to me unless you come from the ether. Anyway, I want to go over the dreams I had during this time, because there were a lot. We're going to take a moment to brace ourselves for this one. One of the first ones is, God, it was horrific. It is one of the most terrible dreams, visions, whatever have you, I've ever had. Up there with being murdered by being buried alive by an off-duty police officer, and then also having my face wrought in by a torture device underground somewhere. No, this was on like a global scale of pure destruction. Not to be that person, but it was because of machines, basically. So the dream split in two directions, kind of like how it did in the other recording that I made, and I described that. So one portion of the dream was a reality where humans had become so desensitized to violence that they mutilated their own children and infants and sewed them up in various horrific manners. The other was where humans had turned themselves into machines to murder other humans to the point of global genocide and omnicide. It was bloody, it was metal, it was crushing and grinding and crunching, and it was slaughter on repeat. So then I was shown, then I was shown the true quote-unquote nature of the dream. And it was that if we ever went over a quota as humans for global abuse of each other and animals and the environment, machines from far away would come to destroy us like some sort of Hollywood apocalypse movie. Except the Hollywood apocalypse movie was real in my head because it was a dream, and I had to watch thousands of people get murdered and crushed. And this is what the future would be like in 2000-ish years if we didn't make changes now, essentially. Except even in the dream, I was just swarmed with like these streams of thoughts from other people and outside entities of just like, who cares? I don't have to deal with it, or I'll be dead by then, and so on. I did not even pay much attention to these, as I was still trying to absorb the raw horror of what I had seen, and I still think about this stuff that I saw in these visions, dreams, /whatever, to this day. So, upon waking, I felt grim, of course. It was a dream. But that didn't change the sheer amount of symbolism of it that reminded me of pressing waking issues in, this world that we live in. So, at the time, I sighed and I tried to forget about it, but it was hard. especially when another iteration of it resurfaced. This time, the machines were Nazis. Literal Nazi machines, bent on destruction and torture. I will not relay the horror, because on top of those murderous Nazi machines were like Nazi time travelers, like interdimensional time travelers who controlled the machines and took pleasure in quote-unquote cleansing timelines and universes of degenerates. God fucking Christ, it was just, oh, holy shit. So, one day, I was asleep in Shane's room, and I had one of those dreams where the dream takes place where you physically are, so it's weird when you wake up, essentially. And in this dream, I was recording on my phone a little message to no one, explaining how I was afraid, but at the turning point on whether I would engage in sex work or not, and how if I did, I wouldn't have many legal protections or sympathy. I mentioned in the recording that I just wanted to make enough money to support myself and my friends and give to environmentalist causes and education. The whole point was that better education was mandatory, and I'd do anything to help bolster it. So, a little bit of pause in the dream before I laid down in the bed, Shane's bed, and concentrated on not concentrating and letting my thoughts wander. Basically, not being in control of my own thoughts and then observing what sort of word patterns appeared and if they would make sense. It was during this where I began to shockingly experience telepathy with entities that were trying to contact me, which made me nearly fall out of my bed in the dream. I tried to concentrate on communicating mentally and turned my phone on for recording, in the dream too, and made what was quote-unquote alien contact with Rem, which is an OC of mine, like an original character. So, Jesus Christ, it was weird. Apparently, quote-unquote aliens are OCs. OCs are aliens. Original characters are aliens. And so, they had explained, or were explaining how they had been waiting forever, like really forever, for me to realize that this is how you contact aliens, by not thinking your own thoughts and letting go. Wow, if only we could prove imaginary friends were all the aliens they told us about. I, for one, am totally pleased that imaginary friends are being held in Area 51. Makes total sense. Just kidding, I'm not pleased, I'm horrified. So, anyway, I woke up from that dream, understandably, I think, weirded out, but now pretty much intrigued at the thought of aliens as OCs that insert themselves into our consciousness from another dimension, because that was what my character Nightmouth had been for a while, without the concept being quite worded like that. But I didn't want to think about it too much as I was focused on experimenting with spirit work. I was concerned about the integrity of my dreams and why they were all being so vivid. I generally don't like to have super vivid dreams because I found in most cases, the more vivid they are, the more likely they are to later explain something that occurs in waking life, or, waking life later on. Not to get a Native American mystic on anyone, of course. So, a few days later, a hazy dream came to me. It didn't have a very good place in the order of everything, but it was somewhat in a quote-unquote soul origins for, like, these zodiac constellation family OCs I have. So, it was like a thing where their souls carry with them stuff that ties to the beginnings and timelines and lifetimes of how they sort of tended to incarnate. And no pun intended, but all the Zodiac constellation family OCs were serial killers. Excuse me. Every single one of them. And they each had their own horrible methods. In particular, Lucian was obsessed with making things look beautiful and would sew people's faces up in a way that would reflect a twisted version of this. They also leaned towards killing their own children if they had them with Judas. Anthony tended to just shoot people and be mad about it. Isabel buried people alive and wanked over their graves. Well, that's one way to let the investigators find your DNA at the crime scene, I guess. Fran wordlessly bathed in the blood of people who attempted to usurp her monarchy. Christian cooked people and ate them. Dimitri tortured animals in front of their victims, like Ariel, or tortured animals that they knew were people. Ariel as a chicken. Anyone? So, Judas in particular, the character, not the guy in the Bible, was the most sadistic. And once he figured out that Lucian killed their children, he killed Lucian's sibling, Sephiel, via poisonous asphyxiation after, well, I'm not going to get into detail on it, it's too horrible. Agnivarsha did kill one person, but it wasn't serial killing more than a revenge kill before they then committed suicide. So yeah, dark stuff. It's not too far from the type of stuff that already lurks in the abandoned universe of FMK, short for Fuck, Marry, Kill, which is something I'll get into later as a concept that appears in fictional work I do. Which is why it's entirely plausible to consider these things that actually happened in some incarnation, but are currently being attempted to be purified away from their souls or something by the ruling planets, which are other characters I have. Or better yet, maybe none of this horrific stuff even happened. That's what the anima characters would try to say, probably. And if you have no idea what the heck I just talked about, maybe it's time for you to learn about my fictional settings and characters. So, moving on. In another dream, I worked on an Air Force base. Yeah, I wasn't a pilot or anything. And occasionally I flirted with these guys who I recognized as, not actually being members of the alt-right, but having people think they were for the sake of infiltration of the alt-right. And the alt-right's respective infiltration of the USA military and its politics. Think of the plot of the Black Klansman, sort of, if you watch that movie. It's sort of like that, and just the guy it's based off of as well. So, yeah. After going out on the town one night, one of them told me that the Air Force really did have a weather machine, and I told him that I had seen things that were bigger than that, jokingly. And he said, quote, "Oh yeah? I bet a bitch like you has seen a dragon or two." Winky face. And the statement was so informal and flirtatious that I woke up from it due to shock. Yeah, so that's how that was. And here's the second part of this document, which is called, I guess, The Weird Fairy Void. So I had another dream that went something along the lines of this. Fairies are real, right? But they're not corporal in our realm, despite being able to affect it / be parallel to it in empty space and take physical form elsewhere. Yeah, call this Imagination Land, quote-unquote, if you will. Imagination Land is like an inverted version of our world in real life, planet Earth, where there is a lot of water, there's desert, and where there's a lot of desert or arid rock, it's water. That's like the reverse parallel equivalent. So, this makes it so the surface of the world that the fairies and other fictional beings have is actually only 30% water overall, and there's a huge, huge demand for water. And one of the ways to give fairies / spirits / whatever water is to draw them in our world and then burn the picture. If you want to douse them in flames, dunk the picture in water. The medium of watercolor is very fiery to them. Digital art is quote-unquote cool and watery. It has to do with electricity, which is hot, so... Anyway, fairies and dragons slash unicorns, whatever, yeah, they all have animosity towards humans in general. Even children, and especially the children of rich people, who rarely help wish poverty and suffering away because they're too sheltered from it. But all in all, there is contempt for humans in general, and you have to, like, prove yourself to them. And parallel me, I don't know, dream me, whatever, I did this by jumping into a bathtub full of cold water, and also later finding one of the water fountains in the park I live nearby, and jumping into that as well. By the way, I mean, like, while I was awake, not asleep. Because I wanted to, like, affect the dream world. Or something like that. Imagination land. Yeah. Right. So, this actually continued on the dream story, and this somehow proved that I was part phoenix due to my imagination land equivalent essentially being set on fire and surviving. This probably had something to do with me being related to eagles due to the fact that it's my mother's literal spirit animal that she obtained in her sweat lodge journey with elders. So yeah. The Fae / fiction folk told me an interesting story that was a version of Noah's Ark. They told me that when the animals had been gathered up to be put on the Ark, there wasn't actually enough room for everyone. It wasn't a matter of the fantasy creatures going and goofing off as the water apocalypse was approaching. There wasn't enough room. So there was squabbling between the beasts of fantasy and the beasts of, what we have now. So eventually the water came and everyone had to watch the horrible sequence of all the fantasy creatures drowning as the water consumed them all. According to the tellers of this story, some angels who were helping with the Ark project could not handle the suffering they saw and dove into the waters themselves and sacrificed their bodies to make a place where the drowning fantasy creatures could go. So this, in effect, became the start of this quote-unquote imagination land, if you will. Makes for an interesting story. So, supposedly, for fantasy creatures, quote, too much imagination, end quote, can kill them. Apparently, I had an ancestor that was me. Holy shit, not the fucking you are your own ancestor trope again. Holy crap. But yeah, it was me. And that ancestor would go around investigating the deaths of Fae and would eventually come to the entirely professional conclusion that the party had died of, quote, too much imagination. And this went down in the history in the form of a military joke, usually circulated by the Air Force, that whenever somebody went off and did some dumb shit that got them killed, they were announced to have died of too much imagination. And it became military slang for essentially died from thinking that something was a good idea, and in theory it was, but it killed them in action. So I found my relation to this meme to be pretty amusing. I was given a tour of an Air Force base. Don't ask me why fairies have Air Force bases, chucklefucks. And I was asked if I'd like to go into a meeting room for the quote-unquote alt-right. Yeah. I was concerned at this, but was assured in some amusement that it, quote, wasn't what I thought. So, still holding my reservations about the situation, I agreed. I was then told I would have to change outfits if I really wanted to do so. So, I agreed to that odd request and was given some goth attire? I don't know. But when I walked in, I looked goth as fuck, and that's all that really matters, I guess. I went into the meeting, and with an amount of eyes looking over me wordlessly, it was kind of weird. So, there were quite a few of your typical white blonde-haired, blue-eyed men there. Most were white, but there were some non-white people there, and even a few women who looked, very amused, like, really amused. And I didn't say anything, but here's a snippet of what I heard, basically from memory. And I take no responsibility for the content of this conversation. This is like in the dream. So, person A. So, now that we've established those idiots are still off actually being Nazis, I'm pleased to announce that we have a guest infiltrator. Clapping noises. Me being silent. Person A. Yes, it's... Insert name here that refers to me, CJ, but isn't actually any known name I actually use. End insertation. And we're pleased to have them... or her, in our ranks. The group goes, oh yes, she. This is like said in a very facetious tone. So, me catching on that I'm supposed to like fill a role as a woman, but it's fake. And yeah, so I go, ah yes, it is I. Person A. We've established that everyone got bumfuck bored in the afterlife, combined with the collective horror that we're all essentially the same person. The Jewish Holocaust made this especially embarrassing and obvious. And the group goes, hear ye, hear ye. And person A goes, with our souls connected to animals as well, modern slaughterhouses make this a fucking clusterfuck of fucking fuck. Person A. So, our goal now is to help make things entertaining. Is there entertainment if there's no conflict? No one to fight or go rah 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 at? The group goes rah rah, lol. And person A says, So after we merged our technology with other parts of the spirit realm, it became apparent that we really are all stuck in cycles of death and rebirth. So to make sure everyone gets their turn at happiness and suffering, we have to approach this carefully so that the people who have already suffered are due for joy and are able to obtain this. And then person B, who just walked in, says, so should we keep pretending to be Nazis for the sake of conflict or what? And then person A says, we don't have to call ourselves that since technically we aren't Nazis. I mean, we are and we aren't. If you're pretending to be a Nazi, you're still a Nazi even if it's fake. And person B said, but you're not really a Nazi, right? And at this point, I'm like super confused because, yeah. This meeting went on in a way that requires a little bit more thought to explain. But the gist of the rest of the meeting is that the quote-unquote spiritual alt-right, end quote, is a folly to the alt-right that we experience here in our reality as actual weird nationalist murdery fuckheads. So the spiritual alt-right, they make sure everything goes horribly wrong by pretending to be them and then revealing that they aren't actually them or a part of them, thus making them question everything they believe about their weird neo-Nazi shit, like question all of that right upon death. I don't know, it's weird. So, after I left the meeting room to get food, I came across Roman Baxter. Roman is originally a OC, original character that my friend Kimberly thought up, if I recall, the same time she did, around the time she created another character by the name of Judas Huang. And the whole awkward situation surrounding both of them and another character, Jean, that has tones of rape and sexual assault. So, yeah, he was there. And I didn't really understand what he was doing there, but our conversation went something like this. Hi, Roman. Yeah. Where are your brothers? Elsewhere. Can I talk to you? I guess. Come with me. Alone? You'll be okay. So, we walked alone for a while and sat under a tree on the base. It was there that he started to talk more. He said, I don't understand my purpose very well. I don't want to turn into a machine, but it looks like that's my trajectory, huh? And then I said, what? And he said, if you don't know, then you don't know. At any rate, I don't even actually know who Jean and Judas are. What? I was, like, not able to comprehend this part of the dream due to him, like, being intricately linked to those two. So then he said, when you wake up, you're probably going to have some difficulty discerning the nature of reality. I want to go off and do other things that don't involve either of those two, or anyone. I'm not sure if I follow, Roman. Hey, good then. That means I'm not the only one who doesn't understand any of this. People devote their entire lives to understanding shit and then they die. Yep. Yeah. Yep. And then it was like some King of the Hill shit right there. Yep. And then I was woken up at this point. Contrary to what Roman said, I did not have any particularly difficult point discerning reality. I went about my day and tended to Gabriel as a plant or whatever, and then I sat around and I meditated. I fed the cats, I changed the litter box, looked at the clouds, and I did the dishes. Nothing really out of the ordinary. So, I'm pleased to announce that Roman was wrong, as he usually is. He's a fucking silly character, but yeah. That pretty much documents several portions of dreams sort of stuff that I had in 2017 during the summertime, and just a bunch of contextual stuff to other things. I definitely think the setting for the Imagination Land stuff is interesting for, like, a story or plotline point, regardless of if it is real or true, or, like, prophetizing dreams or all that other bullshit. So, yeah. Thank you for taking a listen to this. It means a lot.